All right, we're good.
Hello, people, and welcome to a live stream with Shadow Starshine. And if you don't know, Shadow Starshine is a fellow YouTuber, not a vegan YouTuber, but a fellow YouTuber who discusses veganism also. He usually argues against veganism, or at least is critical of some of the arguments and discusses the argumentation for veganism. And he's joined with me today as after I made that video that I uploaded with the facetious title "Thank You Hitler," comparing the gassing of pigs with some of the things in the Second World War, the Holocaust. Shadow messaged me. He was like, "Is it really fair to make that comparison? Do you want to discuss whether that's fair or not?" So I said to him, "Yep, let's discuss it." So I've got him on my channel today, and he's going to post it to his own channel as well. And so I've got him with me today to discuss just that. So say hello, Shadow.
Hello, Shadow. Now, I didn't know you were introducing me, so does that leave the onus on me to introduce who you are?
Yeah, you can do that, I guess, if you want.
All right. Well, I am joined by a vegan YouTuber called Footsoldier. He has been constantly posting for many years now, and is a pretty decent sized guy in the scene in the YouTube vegan discussion scene. A lot of his content is very satirical, but often satirical in order to make certain points. We use a lot of use of like irony and such to show how thinking about things in certain ways shows how veganism makes sense, I guess. But yeah, like you said, the one video you made called "Thank You Hitler" was showing that thanking Hitler for showing us the ways to lead to gassing pigs as we do now in animal agriculture. And
Yeah, sure.
yeah, I'm ready for that conversation.
Yeah, because like Peter and a few other welfareist organizations like the RSPCA have come out and said that controlled atmosphere killing, aka gassing, that this is the most humane way to slaughter animals, or at least stun the animals before their throats are slit, because apparently it's supposed to gently let them slip into irreversible sleep, and so they die through suffocation. But it's been described, like Temple Grandin has described it, as this gently slipping into unconsciousness. But actually, the reality of it, which I think at this point is fairly uncontroversial, is that the the moisture in their mucosal membranes, in their nasal passages, and in their lungs, the moisture mixes with the carbon dioxide, the concentrated carbon dioxide in the gas chambers, and it creates a weak carbonic acid. And when the carbonic acid goes in the lungs and in the nasal pathways, it irritates the mucosa lining and creates a burning and an irritation in the airways, and is very painful to the pigs, especially pigs. I'm not exactly sure what the deal is in terms of the sensation with chickens. I need to look into that more. But with pigs, it's definitely very distressing for the pigs. And one thing that Temple Grandin said is you've got to do 90%. You've got to do 90% concentration of um, of this CO2, because then it's going to stun them, or make them unconscious as quickly as possible, and then it's going to be the least painful way. But actually, I've actually got a study which I can send to you later, Shadow. You can take my word for it in the meantime, or I could send you a link now. But the study actually compares different concentrations of CO2, compares 70 and 90, and looked at the distress of the pigs, and they found that at 90, it
Hmm.
irritated the airways more, much more. It was much more distressing to the pigs, and there was more of an acute suffering. But with the 70, it irritated the airways less, but it was more of a prolonged suffering. So both were sort of undesirable. It's like whether you wanted slightly less but more prolonged suffering, or whether you wanted slightly more but less prolonged suffering. And so they came to the decision that both ways are actually bad. And then Temple Grandin also argued that there was different genes in the pigs, that you could have this certain, she termed it, I think, a stress gene or a stress hormone or something.
Sure.
And this in the study was referred to using the specific name of the gene, which I can't remember off the top of my head now, but you can I can send you the study later. But they found that both the pigs with the gene and without the gene both suffered, although the one without the gene maybe suffered slightly less or something, or it wasn't as severe or something, but it was still severe and it was still significant, and it was actually calling into question the um, whether that was actually a good way to stun the animals at all, because it was actually distressing to the animals. Whether it was 70% or 90% or with the gene or without the gene, it didn't seem to matter. It was distressing in all of the cases. So that was just discussing the sort of the concern in terms of just the straight away targeting whether Temple Grandin, with this sort of like welfarist position of it's sort of like humane killing. It's sort of it's not painful killing. I just wanted to get that out of the way before we started talking about rights and before we started to draw the comparisons between the Holocaust and the Second World War and animal agriculture, because that was one of the issues that you raised in my comment section on that Thank You
Mhm.
Hit video. You were asking it, well, is that actually correct? What this other video was saying, is it actually accurate? Who's right, Temple Grandin or the other one? I can't remember what you said specifically, but that was a concern, right?
So okay, so if I take your study's conclusions on face value, you're saying that the stress gene doesn't makes only a negligible difference or not enough difference. We would still consider it an inhumane way to go. Um, and you're also saying that like she was wrong on the 90% claim, that that might in fact be worse. Even if I grant those, like what it really says about Temple Grandin is that perhaps she's not so clear about the science. Like Temple Grandin is a animal behaviorist, not necessarily a chemist or whatever it would take in order to become proficient in this, and she might be using secondhand knowledge that's being passed off on her and then falsely, stating it out. So, like, I can
Yeah,
grant
sure.
that maybe you're right on that, but when we take a look at like sort of the idea behind the gassing the pigs, the idea is still to try and render them unconscious painlessly. Now maybe that fails, right? Maybe that's not what in fact it does, and you're right to show that it is. But one of the things about the comparisons of the Nazism is that I'm not sure that the Nazis really cared so much about that when they were
Yeah,
gassing. Like the gas, what did they use? It was like Zyklon B, right?
yeah,
Right, and that's been a banned substance, which we could potentially use on pigs, but we choose not to. So like maybe you're right that there's this false belief in whether these pigs are actually being gassed in a humane manner. But I still find that there's like this different in intentions between what the Nazis wanted to do, which was to exterminate the Jews. Who cares about them? They're less than human, this and that. Which, I mean, yeah, we can say there's an analogy there to be made with the less than human comment, but there's an uncaringness to it that isn't supposed to be there when we talk about gassing pigs. So
yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I found disanalogous between the comparison. Maybe in the actual effect, you're right. Perhaps you're just right. And I've also said that I somewhat like feel inclined to agree with it because typically in Temple Grandin footage, they're not shy about showing the stunning and killing methods. But I've yet to see an actual gassing of a pig that she says is humane being actually displayed as part of one of the videos.
Yeah, yeah, sure. There is a severe lack of um, transparent transparency and footage as well. Even even trying to like find footage that maybe an undercover vegan activist has gone in and captured. There's not that many uploads of the. I think I found two or something. There was one
Mm-hmm.
that Paul Bashir uploaded, which was like a loop of a clip of pigs getting lowered down, but that was taken from another video, and then I think I found another video, and that was it. There's not that many videos, and I was looking at chickens as well, and I was looking at the chicken gas chambers, and there was this meat company, machinery company, so not the slaughterhouse itself, but the company that supplied the machinery for the slaughterhouses, advertising its controlled atmosphere killing, and it it was like edited in the most hilariously dishonest way, and like the chickens were put in,
Uh-huh.
it showed a timer so you could see how long it took to kill the chickens. And it was like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, four, and then they started to flap on that, and then it jump cut till like 3 minutes or
Right.
something. And then they were like laying there, like gently, sort of like moving and like already dead. And like everyone was just commenting down below that you've just cut out the very bit. Your video was trying to advertise how humane and how gentle this stunning method is, and you cut out the very bit that we wanted to see of the chickens, like when they're getting stunned and when they're slipping unconscious. Are they like running round and distressed and flapping their wings and being really scared, or are they just gently going to sleep, like it was supposed to say? And they literally jump cut that bit out, and so
Uh-huh.
there is a worrying lack of transparency, and not only a lack of transparency of literal, like hilariously dishonest jump cuts, but also just there's not that much footage online that I can find. So yeah, I agree with you there. It's difficult to actually find this stuff, but when you do find it seems to be quite alarming. Um,
Yeah, and
and
I tend to be critical. I've in the past been very critical of the documentaries like Dominions and Earthlings, and it's very easy to say things like, "Oh, you're just showing the worst of the worst," and that claim really is only strengthened when I show counter video evidence, right? Like when I show, here's Temple Grandin stunning lambs and then slaughtering them, and it's easy for me to come up with counter examples that sort of put a wrench in those sorts of documentaries. But when it comes to the gassing of pigs, I honestly have to admit that I have no counter examples that it isn't. I mean, there's the one footage that you almost always use. It's the ones with the pigs going in and them thrashing around like crazy, right? But I don't
yeah,
know
yeah,
of anything to counter that. Now, that's only one example, and one example isn't a very large sample size to prove your point. But I mean, if you have that study and there
yeah,
exists no other counterexamples, then it starts to become more legitimate, and it's hard for me to argue against it.
yeah. I'm gonna paste the study for you right now in here in the oh no, I can't paste it now. I'm gonna go to Discord, and I'll give it to you on Discord. And you don't have to read it right now on the spot,
Sure.
but all the study said it's just the abstract. I've been trying to find the actual full thing, and even on Sci-Hub I can't get it. It's just behind a paywall, and
I see. Well, I'll do my best to link it into the video description so that other people can investigate it as they want to.
it's a fairly detailed abstract, and it just says how they looked at, because this claim by Temple Grandin was that there's a different type of pig without this stress gene, quote unquote.
Hmm.
Um, but that's actually a minority of the pigs that are slaughtered have the absence of this
So
gene. Most of
this
them have this gene,
this
but
okay,
it,
because
if
Temple
we
Grandin's claim was that most of them don't, right?
yeah, sure, but it's actually the opposite is the truth. Apparently, I don't have data to support that claim on hand right now, but either way, this study shows that both types of pigs, whether they've got this gene or not, both types of pigs suffered um, adversions. They were saying like adverse behavior and stuff like this in the abstract, and it was basically painful for both pigs. I don't think it goes into detail about it doesn't go into detail about the carbonic acid um, there, but it's quite easy to substantiate the claim that when carbon dioxide, concentrated carbon dioxide, meets an aquatic solution, such as the moist lining of your lungs or something, it forms a weak carbonic acid. As fairly easy to find. You just need to go on the Wikipedia page for carbonic acid, and I'm pretty sure you'll see that straight away. Um, so, but what you let's go back to the point that you brought up. I think we agree in part that this gas chamber footage seems to be disturbing, and as you say, there's no counters there. I actually want to quickly address before we go back to what you were saying about the intention. I
Mhm.
want to quickly address the side point that you brought up. It's slightly tangential here because we were thinking of maybe having a conversation dedicated to this theme in entirety. But when we were talking in our last live stream, we were discussing the Dominion type footage or the Earthlings type footage versus Temple Grandin type footage, or the footage that you were using in your words just now to counter the Dominion style footage. But the thing is with that, I I didn't feel I don't want to let it slip and seem that I'm tacitly agreeing to the fact that you've successfully countered the Dominion style footage with that footage, because I don't think that countered is the right word. I'd say that the right word would probably be um, shown it in a different light, maybe, or something like this. But I don't think you've countered it because I think it's still alarming. But the thing that I would say with the Temple Grandin footage, um, they've they've cleaned every day. I think every day they clean slaughterhouses or most good uh, quote unquote good slaughterhouses or ones that just aren't totally ghetto. They will clean on a regular basis. So the Temple Grandin footage shows almost invariably a squeaky clean everything, and then the animals are brought in, and you see the first animal get killed on the line and stuff like this, and maybe one or two get killed on the line, but it's squeaky clean beforehand. But the thing is, if you see any videos that show the process in a longer way without editing and jump cuts and different stuff, you see that the after the first animal, the blood squirts everywhere and the walls get dirty. The second one, there's blood everywhere, and by the third one, it looks like a horror show, like the Dominion footage. So by the end of the day, it's only the first couple of animals where the slaughterhouse is marginally clean, but
Well,
very
I
quickly into the day, it looks like Dominion.
I want to kind of, because the reason for the Temple Grandin footage isn't necessarily for cleanliness or a lack of blood or anything. Of course, in a slaughterhouse, you're gonna have blood, and the floors are gonna end up with a ton of blood. The particular parts that I'm talking about of bringing up Temple Grandin footage or other methods of slaughter isn't to show that it can be clean. It's just to show that, like, you don't require to beat the animal, to wrestle the animal to the ground, to stun it like 3 different times. I'm more looking for video footage of where it's being effective, the animal is being stunned, and then the animal's being killed while unconscious. Whether or not that's clean
Yeah,
or not, I don't think is the important part. Because if I'm going to
sure.
argue for animal welfare, right, rather than a vegan option, I have to show that, there's a way to kill them that renders them insensible, and then they're killed without pain, right? And that they're not fighting and struggling the entire time on the way to on the line on the way to it. Those are the sorts of animal welfare concerns that I'm trying to counter from Dominion, because where Dominion wants to establish is that, like, these horrible things happening in these stressed out animals and they're all flailing around, right? That's happening all the time, and I want to show that, well, maybe not. Now, when it comes to when you say things like, well, they're gonna put on their best show for the Temple Grandin footage, I 100% agree, right? Like, of course they are. If they're gonna show something to the public, they want to show the best possible side to it. But of course, if you're a vegan activist and you want to put a compilation of videos that dissuades people from eating meat, you have an onus to put on the worst possible conditions that you can show in order to be convincing. And so we're going to expect that whatever the truth is of average conditions, somewhere in between these two types of footage.
Yeah, sure, and that's something that we actually agree on. I think here, and when I was saying about the Dominion footage being gruesome, what I was talking about was just like the gore factor. I wasn't actually talking about the mishandling specifically. So I think I agree with you there, but that's not what I was sort of getting at. So it seemed like I was saying something maybe a bit different because when I mentioned Dominion, I didn't mean about the gratuitous abuse
Hmm.
that we saw there. I just meant about the gruesomeness of, like, you say, like the lighting and the music, and it looks like a sort of like a horror show, where the Temple Grandin looks a lot more controlled and clinical, and sort of like a more of a sort of less of a horror movie. And all I meant by that was that it looks exactly like a horror movie after the third animal anyway. So um, I wasn't talking specifically about the violence towards the animals. But the thing is, with the violence point, of course they're not going to go in, like you just said, they're not going to go in and say, oh, this is how we do it. They're going to randomly like be like punching the animals in the head. Of course they're not going to do that. But what we've seen in terms of the statistics and the psychology of it, is that you get these disorders, you get Pitt's disorder, and you get all these weird mental disorders
And we
by
should
work.
probably shout out to Perspective Philosophy's video on that because it's really excellent.
Definitely. Yeah, he did an excellent video on that a while back, and he also came on my channel and discussed a similar thing on a live stream. I can't remember exactly what that was called, but yeah, Perspective Philosophy did some great work on this, and he was saying how the psychology of the slaughterhouse worker inevitably, it sort of like breaks people. It sort of like makes them do these horrible things that they previously probably wouldn't have done. But being in that environment of violence and constant killing sort of like makes you snap a bit. And I think until there's more automation and less human uh, hands-onness in the process, I think there's going to be that violence there. But I'm not even talking about that violence. That violence is there, and that violence won't go away. Until there's automation, that violence is part of the psychology of the industry. But that's not even what I was talking about. I was just talking about the gruesomeness. When you see the slaughterhouse footage, even without the punching and the kicking, um, just the general public, when they see slaughterhouse footage, whether it's somewhat cleaner or somewhat less clean, it's disturbing. There's something disturbing about it, even in the absence of the punching and the kicking. Well, but that's something you don't agree with, right, Shadow?
I suppose not. Yeah, like I agree. You're gonna have some level of blood, some level of goriness, but as to whether or not that's disturbing, I suppose is a little different to different individuals. Like I've watched enough footage where I've seen the process from the stunning to the bleeding out to the carving up, right? That I don't feel disturbed by it,
Yeah,
right? Like that's sort of just a butcher's job. That's the process that they go through. Whereas where I get really disturbed is when I'm seeing the gratuitous harm to animals and the punching and the kicking and the like all the distress or the video that you provided with the gassing pigs. That's disturbing to me.
yeah,
So
sure.
I guess there's different degrees on what people find disturbing, and perhaps that ends up leading to what position you end up taking on the issue.
I guess if you find it disturbing with the pigs thrashing about in the gas chamber cage, then you'd find it equally disturbing if the animals were suffering as part of the process in general anyway, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've since I've taken on the vegan conversation like 2 years ago, I've only been pushed more and more towards welfarism, where it's just harder and harder to ignore certain
Yeah,
conditions. And since then I've abstained from pork products because I don't feel like there's any way I can defend the sowing crates, which
yeah,
seem horrible. And as more and more things come to light to me, it's often hard to defend a lot of the standards,
yeah.
but I still maintain a lot of the principled arguments that I started with.
Yeah, so and I'm starting to see more and more people in this position, like more and more highly intelligent people such as yourself. Like Magnus said the other time I had him on my channel as well, that um he will critique and argue against veganism until he's blue in the face. But he's now eating a predominantly plant-based diet because he's convinced of the health and environmental factors. In Magnus's case, I don't think he really cares too much about the welfare. He essentially considers animals robots. But in your case, you're convinced more about the welfare side of it. And the more intelligent people I speak to, that they might still argue against the principles of veganism. They argue about this, argue about that, but at the end of the day, it's like, what are you eating? Are you eating factory farmed pigs? Are you eating the cheapest bacon in the store? And increasingly more people are saying no, they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is an interesting thing to note. But I think yeah, it's tangential to our discussion here, because let's discuss the intentionality that you brought up
Sure.
previously, saying that you mentioned that Zyklon B was used, and why wouldn't they just use whatever gas just to kill them, if they didn't care about the welfare? And I think the answer to that is carcass damage. Um, Zyklon B, I'm not sure. Like, obviously, the Jews that were gassed in the Second World War weren't eaten, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
Um, there was a very, very, very small scale sort of tangential usage as soap manufacturing of some of the body fat, but I don't think that was from people in gas chambers. It may or may not been from gas chambers, but it was a very, very small thing,
I
and it
believe it
was
was.
almost.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
believe it was the soap making was, but you might be
Okay.
right to say that like it doesn't really matter which gas you use if you're just gonna
Yeah.
reduce them to soap as opposed to eat, the meat. So it
Yeah.
might be still
Exactly.
a fair point, anyways.
Yeah. Because carcass damage is the name that they use in the meat industry to refer to the degrading of their product, of the corpse of the animal, when there's sort of like, if the animal struggled, or like it's been cut with a knife uh, in the wrong way whilst it's been slaughtered, or it was thrashing about in chains or something, it snaps his legs, which often happens when cows and pigs are strung upside down and stuff like this. um, that then it sort of like damages the saleable portion of the corpse, and it reduces their profits. So carcass damage is especially with birds, especially with birds, because they flap about and they sort of like dislocate their wings and all like um, yeah, it degrades the quality of the meat, or whatever you want to say, and it's less profitable for the um, animal abuse and industry to profit from. And so um, this is something which is really taken into consideration by the meat industry, because I don't know if Cyclone B would make the meat poisonous. I'm assuming it would, but for example, there's other gases which they can use, more inert gases, which would not irritate, which would
Hmm.
not turn into carbonic acid in the lungs, in the airways, because the carbon dioxide, when it meets the moist airways, as we discussed, turns into carbonic
Right.
acid, and
But
it
of course, we know
burns them,
those gases
irritates.
exist because we're put under by them in hospital procedures and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you've got argon, you've got not not nitrate. What's it? Nitrogen. Sorry.
Nitrous
You've got.
oxide, is it?
I think it's nitrogen, which is the main constituent of air. I'm pretty sure is nitrogen, and basically other gases are available and in use for human um anesthesia, or whatever they're used for. They're abundantly available. But the problem is, it might take 60 seconds longer to render the animals unconscious, or the gases are marginally more expensive to buy in to the slaughterhouse. So these be, these things, because the profit margin of animal agriculture is so incredibly thin already, they're sort of like every cent matters, because they're not making any money and they depend on the subsidies. And if they stop getting subsidies, the whole industry would crash, because the profit margin is tiny, almost non-existent at this point.
Uh,
It,
I mean, I don't
if
know how to verify that, but that might be true.
yeah, it is. The industry is in a very perilous state financially. So if they upgraded the killing methods to be something that was a higher welfare standard, not that I actually would support a welfarist position, but just to go along with the concerns of the gas that you raised with Zyklon B, even if they were to use like argon gas, or some gas that was like markedly better in the welfarist aspects, they they wouldn't care if it wasn't profitable for them. So profit is one of the biggest influencing factors at play.
Well, do you
And
think, like, because I'm not going to disagree that profitability is going to be part of any industry, animal agriculture not excluded, obviously. But do you think that if there was this just horribly painful gas, that it would still be used if it was like a slightly more profitable? Is that kind of your intuitions on the subject? Is that it's just 100% profitability, 0% welfare?
yeah, well, that's what we're seeing. That's exactly the situation as it stands.
Well, I don't know how to verify that because I don't know how many gases there are available in order to knock something out. I mean, you might even be able to save more money by just hitting them with hammers or something.
Yeah, well, the way that they do it in the cow industry is by using bolt guns, right?
Hmm.
So different industries have different methods. The chicken stunning practices, um, before they started to phase in controlled atmosphere killing, was to shackle them upside down, which a lot of the times would be extremely or almost invariably extremely distressing to the birds to be shackled upside down in, and then their heads would dripped in an electric bath, which would render them unconscious because
Hmm.
it electrocuted their brains, obviously. And but a lot of the chickens, uh, fairly routinely, would avoid the water, so they would sort of like lift up their head so they didn't go in the bath, so they wouldn't be stunned, and then they would just be like deep, like partially decapitated by this like rotary blade, which like at neck height, just like they were going along this conveyor belt, and it would like slice their jugular open, and just they would just like die this slow, agonizing death by like pouring, squirting blood out of their
Well,
necks.
sure, but if your argument here is that it's 100% profit, 0% welfare, why does that electric bath even exist? Like, why not just
Oh,
start with a rotary blade?
yeah, but the thing is, the electric bath is so cost effective. So not cost effective. What's the word? Like just negligible cost. So
Yeah, but
it's almost like, oh yeah,
obviously
that
negligible cost is more than zero cost, right? Like I said, you can just have the rotary blade, screw the bath whatsoever. So
yeah, but
I feel like
the
that puts a
bath,
cog into the 0% at least.
probably costs $200, and in the grand scheme of $1 million operation, like
Wow,
a
are you
$1 million
just
client.
speculating on that? Like,
Yeah, I'm speculating, but how much does an aluminium basin with like two wires connected to like a transformer, like it's like I could build one myself like in half an hour with parts in my garage. Like it's such a negligible cost within the grand schemes of the operation. It's almost like, yeah, we'll just do that to shut up the welfareists, and yeah, we're stunning them, so nothing to see here. It's all fine, because if they didn't do that, they before they probably just had the blade without the electric stunning. But then at some point in the 70s or 80s or something, with pressure from the welfareist groups, they probably brought in the electric bath as some sort of like, oh yeah, yeah, we'll just do that. It
but keep
doesn't
in
cost
mind,
much.
welfarism isn't just a social movement, right? Like, there's social movement of welfarism, which is to increase the welfare standards, but there's also just laws of welfare
Yeah.
standards as well, right? So
Yeah, but
they
laws
do.
follow sentiment.
But I'm just saying, it's not just because they're appeasing the welfarists or people like me out there. It's
Mm.
also because they're being forced to, right? And
Yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
point
But
is that
mm,
people like me, who, if we disagree with the welfare standards, fight for the laws to increase so that they're forced to do it.
sure, but it's your, yeah, exactly like you just said. It's a negative sentiment surrounding an issue which leads to legislative reform, which then enforces the implementation of welfare upgrades, right? So it is the original sentiment. It's not like the laws just magically spring uh, from nowhere because of the concern that the government has for animals. The government doesn't have any concern for animals in itself. The government isn't without the sentiment of the people who comprise a government and the country. The government doesn't have any opinion independent of the sentiment of the people that it represents, right? So it is the sentiment of the welfarists which push the laws which get the electronic
and
bath. Right.
that's totally fine because what I was trying to do was to draw the original disanalogy between the Nazi government and the animal agriculture industry. Even if you just say that it's based on the sentiments of the people, which was forced into legislation, which increases the welfare standards of the practices, that's still a disanalogy from the Nazi World War II, which was to just get rid of the Jews.
Sure. So let's target that more specifically. So I took a few notes here, and what I wanted to discuss more specifically. So the the analogy that I'm drawing between whether it's a fair comparison or not, if we look at the similarities, so we've got the gas chambers, right?
Mhm.
We've been discussing already. But not only do we have the gas chambers, we've got the transportation to the gas chambers. And in World War II, it wasn't only the horror of the concentration camps themselves, but it was also like the horrible conditions, how they were transported to the the gas
Well,
chambers and
before
the
before we move to that, I just
yeah,
want to know if we did have agreement on like the sort of ways the laws revolved around the issue to begin with.
yeah.
Like because
Um,
Nazi Germany was the law, right? They were the power that made the concentration camps. It wasn't they weren't listening to the pressure of the people to increase the welfare standards. It was really just up to them as to whether or not they did it or not. Whereas in for animal agriculture, it is the sentiments of the people changing laws that increase the standards. So I thought, do we agree that there is at least a disanalogy there?
I would say there's a disanalogy, but for a different reason, as what you're saying. So we need to understand the context, right? So the Nazi Party, National Socialist Party, were elected democratically. They actually got into power because people voted for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of propaganda involved and a lot of sort of like manipulation behind the scenes and a lot of dodgy tactics involved as well. But they in give or take, plus or minus, in some roundabout way, they did actually legitimately get into power, or Hitler got into power in a sort of legitimate way. And then it, I don't think it was written that publicly in their manifesto that, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to kill 6 million Jews in concentration camps in Auschwitz, like that. They didn't like sort of they didn't have that in their manifesto. It wasn't open. The public didn't know about this, and a lot of people at the time were a lot of people at the time didn't. I don't think that many people at the time actually knew. I think it was fairly secretive. If you ask the average sort of soldier, the infantry guy fighting for the German side, the Axis sort of like standard infantry guy, and you said what's happening with the Jews, they would know that the Jews were sort of getting rounded up and getting deported and stuff like that. But I don't think anyone fully 100% knew that they were getting gassed in gas chambers and holocausted. That wasn't common knowledge,
Well, sure.
but it's
And I don't think you're wrong on that. It's
mm,
just that I think that that would contribute to the disanalogy, right? Where there is laws because there is an awareness of at least somewhat of what the animal agriculture is supposed to be, whether or not we're aware of the actual realities or not. At least we have an idea that it exists and sort of what general ideas we would want for it. Um, and so yeah, that could be a disanalogy, but that just goes to show my point is that there's like a sort of difference in methodology. And one of the other things I would want to point out is that part of the propaganda of the Nazis was to show that the Jews were responsible for a lot of their problems economically, to inspire hate for them, and that doesn't tend to be people's sentiments towards animal agriculture, or the animals in it, is that they're evil and they're responsible for our problems and we got to get rid of them and we got to punish them. There's not this that sort of sentiment towards it.
sure. I don't think every aspect of the Holocaust of the Second World War is 100% analogous to every aspect of animal agriculture. I think there's some central themes which are analogous, but as you're pointing out, not every aspect is 100% overlapping identical. And I don't think anyone who makes the comparison is really suggesting that there are sort of identical overlaps. There's just enough overlaps to make a case that there's some sort of like similarity going on. Because as I was saying, like if you look at the whole picture, we've got the gas chambers, but before you get to the gas chambers, you've got the transportation issues, of people like dying on the way because the transportation was so horrendous, and people just freezing to death, and people like dying of disease on the way. And then, but even before they got transported to the gas chambers and endured the horrible trip, they were rounded up and put into ghettos with overcrowding and poor conditions, and people dying there, and people getting diseases, and living miserable lives, and getting killed and punched and kicked and shot and stabbed, and having their rights violated in the ghettos. So there's these three sort of stages. There's the ghetto stage, the transportation stage, and then the gas chamber stage. And in animal agriculture, you've got the slaughterhouse stage, or the gassing stage in the slaughterhouse. You've got the transportation stage, which a lot of chickens and animals get dehydrated on hot days, or in freezing weather. They die of the cold, or they die of horrible conditions on the way there, and they don't make the trip. And even before that, when they're raised on their quote unquote farms, in the sort of like the intensive feeding operations and the factory farms and stuff like this, then they're overcrowded, they're poorly treated, they've got bad conditions, a lot of them die of disease, or a lot of them go mad and stuff like that. So it's really analogous in terms of the broader picture, the stages, um, ghetto, transportation, gas chamber. It's very analogous in terms of that, and also analogous in terms of the subhuman sort of element. It's like the Jews were deemed to be subhuman,
Uh-huh.
to the Aryan race, and or to I don't know, what they considered, like black people. I think were also considered subhuman to the Nazis. I can't remember the exact groups: gypsies, Jews, and black people. I think, for the most part. And then yeah, the subhuman element of, oh, animals aren't human, so we can do what we want to them, or Jews are subhuman, so we can exterminate them. And so there are a lot of similarities, but there are some things which aren't uh, analogous at all. Like, for example, um, we could say, for example, well, the Nazis weren't killing the Jews for food. We're killing the animals for food. So that's disanalogous. But we could
Well, sure,
just
yeah, but I'm not I'm
we
not gonna bring up, simple things like that. I just more wanted to, like, if I'm sticking to the broad picture, you know,
mm,
I agree that there's like these welfare issues, but I feel like the welfare issues with animal agriculture are more socially thought of differently. Like, I think there's like this big intentional part of it that's just completely different. Whereas, like, maybe in the Nazi regime, to say that the Jews were subhuman and we can do whatever we want with them isn't something we would say towards the animals. It's not whatever we can do, but that's why we have welfare laws, and it's part of like the public thought, is because we can't do whatever we want with them, right? But I feel like that might be more true of the way that the Nazis treated the Jews.
yeah. So what I would say about that is, um, you're right that we can't do whatever we want with them, and to a certain extent, the Nazis did did and didn't do whatever they want with them. So, on one hand, you had the systematic killing, but they sort of like, they didn't just like get all of the Jews that they could find, round them up, and chuck them off a cliff, or or like some just instantaneous thing. They did sort of like put them into ghettos. They did systemize it, that they took them to concentration camps, and they did feed them to some degree. They did that. They sort of like did follow some sort of protocol, but on the other hand, the like level of care that they gave, if you could even have that in a sentence to do with the Holocaust, was obviously so bad that it was almost non-existent. And then there was all the experiments that went on behind the scenes on identical twins, and on all sorts of people, just like, was that the Angel of Death doctor, just like chopping people up and stuff like that. So there was a certain element behind the scenes of doing whatever they want with them, but officially, in terms of like the broader system, there was some tiny sort of like baseline procedure, at least, of how the animals are treated, and that's analogous with animal agriculture. There's this extremely like base level. You can't do like even in the Nazi regime, because of like war crimes and stuff like this, which were obviously broken anyway, but in the sort of like general broader scheme of things, you couldn't just do whatever you wanted. Like there was some there was systemization, there was some sort of like system in place, the same as there is a system in place for animal agriculture. And obviously, so that's not what I'm getting at, that this sort of like element of you can do whatever you want with them. It's more about the fact that in both cases there was like these huge rights violations. Um, in the case of the Jews, the rights violations of um, not only the killing, but the real source rights violation, where everything stems from, is this idea that the Jews could be viewed as like the property of the Nazis, like that they had they owned them. They could like that
Mhm.
they could round them up, put them, take everything from them, steal all their jewelry, steal everything valuable, take all their businesses, take all their real estate, round them up, take everything from them, and then they own them and they could destroy them because they were the property of Nazis or of the German government or something like that. In the same way that the animals are seen as property. The second you're seen as property, then you've lost your basic rights, right? And that's the exactly the same in both animals and what happened in the Second World War with the Jews. It was the essential basic human right as not being treated, or right, not even human right, but right as a sentient creature, to not be treated as property. And do you see that analogy there, Shadow, between the two?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's not that I think that it's completely disanalogous. I suppose where I want to say, in the end, is like the failings on the welfare standard can be thought to be analogous, but for me, the animal agriculture industry, when you see this horrible footage, you do consider it a failing. And for the Nazis, I don't necessarily think it was considered a failing. In fact, it might have been a brimming success from their perspective. It's hard to say the socialist perspective because, as you said, some of it's going to be caught in the dark. But at least for the people who were in the know, that these cutting them up and doing experiments and all this could be thought of as a brimming success for them, for human knowledge or whatever else that reasons that they're giving is getting rid of the horrible Jews causing all their problems, and to them the welfare concerns are just the good things that they're doing, whereas in the welfare concerns for animals is considered the failing, that we're not meeting standards that we should be meeting. And so I feel like that's where one of the disanalogies lies, but I do agree with you on some of the analogies as well.
Sure. Well, a few things that you brought up there are some interesting points to discuss, and I think maybe I can persuade you that some of the things you thought were disanalogies are actually more analogous than maybe you previously considered. And so with the with the excuses, like you're saying that the Jews were responsible for the Germans' problems, so they say in the propaganda, and so
Mhm.
that's how they got people to think that the Jews are causing all the problems. The Jews have made the economy go to shit, and the Jews are taking the jobs away from and the wealth away from the German people. And we need to get rid of the Jews, um, because this and that. And in the case of animal agriculture, we're not saying that the animals are problematic to us, so we need to destroy the animals because they're problematic. Maybe in some sort of fringe case, like some environmental thing with deer overpopulation or something, but that's not the point. The main focus is this food. So it's not like the animals are problematic. It's like the animals are food. But if we actually pull away the veneer of what is essentially the veneer of excuses and look underneath what is happening. We've got one case of we've got an ulterior motive. We want to kill the Jews because we want to exterminate the Jewish race, and then we have this veneer of excuses that we can feed the people of why this is okay to do so. And in the same way as with animal agriculture, it's like, oh, well, we've got this motive of we want to make money, and we're gonna have this veneer of excuses of, oh, you need your protein, you need your vitamin B12, you need all of the fat soluble vitamins that Sverige goes on about, and you're going to be protein deficient and deficient in all this stuff if you don't eat it, and all the propaganda and the brainwashing and the marketing to make you think that it's manly to eat meat and all this other nonsense, which is demonstrably false. So there's this veneer of propaganda and excuse making when underneath there is just interest for a particular group of people, in terms of the people who make money from animal agriculture, and in terms of the people who um, have the motive of exterminating the Jews as their actual core principle. So see, actually, when you peel off that veneer, you can actually see underneath that it's just a set of people with a desire to do something, and they're hoodwinking the rest of the
I,
population into doing it.
I don't think I agree with the propaganda case on the animal agriculture. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that, animal meat was actually just part of a staple diet that was necessary, right? We're only recently within the the point where we could even analyze this as a possible conversation as to move towards veganism as an option, because we now have greater access to a wider variety of foods. If people have B12 problems, we can fortify B12, right? Whereas before, you didn't have those options. Meat was a necessary part. And so I think, obviously you didn't need a propaganda to eat meat at that point. And then it's only recently that, it becomes something worth analyzing. And because of that, I think we didn't ever needed to convince people. It's just the fact that it was already there. It was already established, right? It's just unchallenged. You don't have to convince people that they must be manly. Or I think this is just feelings people just have, regardless of whether people tell them. It's just something wired in their animal brains, that people just don't critically analyze. I don't think they have to be
Maybe.
propagandized it, from an outside source.
Maybe I don't know. Like I think it. I would have to disagree in it on a few points there, because when you say until recently, I'm not sure what your metric is for recent, but I think, like, I've shown on my channel a couple of like propaganda pieces from like the 50s and stuff like this, showing like saying like ridiculous shit funded by the meat industry, saying that like if Jeff doesn't eat his his meat, then he's going to grow up feeble and weak and all this sort of stuff. It's
Sure.
like
No, I
50s
agree
American
that
propaganda.
there exists propaganda within all these markets, and
Yeah.
I mean that would probably, exist for anything like carrots giving you good eyesight and whatever. That's not true either. It's just, and I know that was part of a war effort to convince other people to eat a load of carrots, or something, or as the story goes. But the point is that with a lot of foods come all these spurious claims, because anyone selling any specific product wants to convince people to eat that. But when it comes to
Yeah.
just the general idea of eating meat, I don't think people really ever needed convincing. I think it's just already hardwired into people to eat it, and it's only really after critical analysis would you start to consider the reasons to not eat meat.
Well, I would have to again disagree slightly. I agree with you, the fact that um, that eating meat has been a part of the human culture for a long time, but I would have to disagree in terms of the degree to which we have eaten meat. Um, traditionally, and certainly before the Second World War, we ate far less meat than we do today, and it was a far smaller part of our
I never
exist.
made a claim about an amount.
Sure, but the significance of and the role of meat in a diet was very different pre World War Two as it is today, or pre 50s even. Like um and going back in history, we see like people all over the place, Leonardo da Vinci and all sorts of people. You can go back even further, like to ancient Greece and stuff, people not eating animals and objecting and stuff like this. So I agree that it has been a part of the diet of humanity for a very long time to consume animal products to some extent, but the idea that if you don't eat meat, like you're not as much as of a man or something like this, or some sort of like weird sort of masculinity bullshit as part of uh, the association with meat, especially the association with protein and specific nutrients. People didn't even know those words. Just not so long ago, like I don't know, when people started saying the word protein, probably didn't say it 500 years ago, and
Wow,
and
it's a
so
big part
really,
of bodybuilding.
yeah. Back in like the ancient days, like a couple of thousand years ago, like the gladiators and all these, the barley men, all these people, they were eating like a ton of like grain and lentils, and there was one study to indicate that the gladiators were vegetarian. So it's like this whole associating meat with masculinity and associating it with protein, associating this, that, and the other. That is definitely like a 50s, 1950s late and later tradition of propaganda that I would definitely say that has its source in propaganda campaigns.
Yeah, well, I might agree with that because I'm gonna come and agree that I think it's a bullshit claim. You don't need to eat meat to be a man, or
Yeah.
whatever. Have this concept of masculinity. I guess the point that I was disagreeing with is I just don't think it requires propaganda to get people to eat meat. I don't think it's necessary. I think people would already naturally want to do it, whether or not there was propaganda or not. You feed your child meat, they're just gonna eat it. Like it's an enjoyable experience, and nothing more really needs to be said. It's only the after critical analysis that makes you start to ponder whether or not you should do it.
Well, again, I'm sort of reluctant to agree there that it's just naturally enjoyable or naturally tasty or something. When I was a kid, firstly my own personal experience, I hated meat. I found it chewy and horrible. Like, I absolutely hated meat. I used to eat all the potatoes and the Yorkshire puddings and all that. And my roast dinner, I'd sit there. Like my parents said, you can't leave the table until you've eaten all of your food and including the meat. And I would sit there like once. I think I sat there for 2 hours or something in protest because I just didn't like it, didn't want to eat it. And this was when I was quite young.
You don't think
And
you're in the minority on that one?
I think I might be in the minority. I don't have any statistics to suggest otherwise, but I can point you to all sorts of figures throughout history who have been vegetarians. We've got like half of half of Asia of vegetarians, not 50% obviously, but you know what I mean. And we've got historically a lot of cultures and a lot of very important people in history have objected morally to consume meat, and not only in terms of um,
Well, I
internet.
mean, I can grant that, but that doesn't tell us whether or not that's their natural disposition or a critical analysis afterwards. So it doesn't really even distinguish between those two possibilities. And I'm sure we would agree that always the vegetarian movements and all that has always been the minority part of humanity.
Mm. Sure, I think where are we going with this? Is it natural to have the desire to eat meat? Where does that fit into our conversation with the whether it's fair to compare
I
the
can't
second one?
really remember how we got here, to be
Yeah,
to be honest. So if you
I
want to
think it
move out
might.
of it, that's fine.
Yeah, it might be tangential because whether it's natural or not, I don't think is something that neither uh, you or I would actually care about anyway, because we like who cares if it's natural or not?
Sure.
When we're discussing ethics or discussing health or discuss like I don't know where that would be an important consideration in the first place.
Right. And so when it comes back to the topic, we expected it to sort of go this way. Is that like one of the main comparisons is the subhuman comparison, in that
Yeah.
we have a certain permissibility to set the standards for those beings and to implement them as we see fit. Right now, even I, as a welfarist, have to agree that that's something I'm agreeing to, is that I can set the standards for the animal. I just happen to have standards that include welfare, but they're still my
Yeah.
standards, right? And there, that could be shown as a likewise analogy to the Nazi regime, is that they set their own standards and they implemented them as well.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that, and I'd say that but in both cases, in animal agriculture and in the Second World War, they celebrated the throughput of their death facilities. So if they were to kill more Jews, then that would be something to celebrate in for the Axis powers in World War Two. And if your slaughterhouse throughput killed 500 more heads of pigs or something per day than some other facility, that would be a celebration as well. So the celebration of the throughput of death is is celebrated. So when whether there are welfare standards in place for the Holocaust and of the Jews, however low those welfare standards might be, I think we agree that they were low. but would we even really be concerned with welfare standards of the Jews at Agast, or would we be more concerned with the rights violations of the Jews?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm more concerned about, well, for the Jewish, right? I'm going to come down to rights, and then I'm going to flip the bill on the animal agriculture, and I'm going to come down to welfare standards. So
Yeah.
I'm obviously making a distinction where, you feel like there's no distinction there to be made.
I think this is the crux of the matter because I think I'd like to dive into that because I'd like to dive into that, but before we do, we should round off the analogies between the two first. So we should round that off and then get into a conversation which is essentially speciesism, right? So you've
Mhm.
got one standard which is rights for humans, but you've got welfareism as a standard for for the non-human animals, and then so we need to get into the speciesism to understand why that flip happens. But let's before we do that, let's round off what we were talking about with the comparison to the World War II Holocaust. The last thing that I'd say on the issue would be there have been some Holocaust survivors, some Jewish Holocaust survivors who have actually agreed about this comparison between animal agriculture and the Holocaust and said that there are similarities and that there's been some people in sort of like vegan documentaries who are Holocaust survivors who have commented about this. And so what do you think? Do you think that is it when we're going back to the original proposition of the debate, is it or the conversation, it's not really so much of a debate, more of a discussion, but the proposition, is it fair to compare animal agriculture to what happened in the Holocaust? And if there's a Holocaust survivor saying that, comparing himself, do you think that brings any weight to the proposition?
Not necessarily, because I'm sure you could find, a Holocaust survivor who says that comparison's disgusting, and it's just, what are we supposed to do when we weigh one against the other? It, I think me and you have put some stuff on the table to show where we do think it's analogous and where we don't. I think we agree in some areas. We don't agree in some others, but I think at least we've been productive, at least about putting some things on the table that
Yeah.
people can chew on and show how it can be analyzed at least.
Sure. I think my main analogies that I want to draw are the three stages of like the ghetto, the transportation, and the gas chambers, analogous to the poor conditions on the farm, the horrendous transportation, long distance transportation to the slaughterhouses, and then the gassing in the slaughterhouse. So the same killing method, um, the same systemization, and at the root of that, the reason why it's deemed okay is a rights violation, or the dismissal of the right not to be owned as property. No, and this is the violation which is making that possible. And whether it was the humans having their rights violated or whether it was the animals having the non-human animals having their rights violated, it was a violation of the right to be not owned as property. Essentially, I think is what's going on there in both cases. So I think my case, at least I find it compelling that you can make a comparison between the two. But Shadow, you have raised some interesting points, but I still think that it's a strong comparison. Would you say at this point that you'd think that it's fair to compare? What do you think about the original proposition?
Um, well, as almost always, whenever I approach issues or questions like that, it's not that I want to show it's either true or it's false. It's just more like let's not treat a simple issue as or a complex issue as simple. That's usually my main goal, and
Yeah.
I hope we've at least accomplished that.
Okay.
People can take
Yeah.
away from it, what parts of it they think are fair or not, and I think at least we've done our job if we've shown the complexities of the discussion.
Sure. Would you like to segue into the issue of speciesism for the distinction between the welfareism with the non-human animals and the rights with the human animals, or should we leave that for another conversation?
Um, I guess I don't think we should dive too long into it. We've already been on this for an hour, but
Yeah,
I think we should acknowledge that that's a large difference in our intuitions about the event, the distinctions where I come from a position of honoring these human rights that they apply to all humans, even when they tend to be equivalent to a to an animal, right? Most other things like the cognition and the levels are similar. Some people might call sentience levels, but I don't like those terms. But it gets the general idea across. Um, is that I apply more rights to humans than I don't to animals that allow the permissibility of animal agriculture where a human wouldn't be okay in that place. And you find that there's nothing convincing between that distinction, and that distinction shouldn't be used and instead just abolish the whole thing. Does that sound right?
sure. Yeah, well, I would elaborate slightly on that position insofar as I don't think we should draw any distinctions in terms of the way that we treat people unless there's some obviously valid reason to do so. For example, if there's someone uh, who yeah, like a chicken shouldn't be given the right to vote, but a human who doesn't have cognitive capacity to understand the complexities of voting shouldn't be given the right to vote either.
Right.
So I think it doesn't matter about the species of the person we're considering to be able to vote. Whether they're, it doesn't matter about the species at all. It matters about whether they're in a position to be able to vote, or whether it makes sense for them to vote, and their species doesn't come into it because I can envision some genetic freak orangutan or something that develops I don't know, like in some sort of like sci-fi movie that develops the ability to speak and interacts in society, and then if we were to deny the right to vote to that chimp just based on or that orangutan just based on the species, it would be like, okay, well actually he's debating politics on national TV, like in this sci-fi
Sure.
movie. Like, why would we deny it based on his species? Why would we deny that right? It doesn't make any sense because it's not the species that matters. It is like the color of someone's skin, or some lifestyle behavioral thing that doesn't really matter with a person. It's about like whether they're in a position to be considered for the thing that you're talking about. Like for example, voting, they need to, like a legal guardian needs to be sound of mind and over the age of 18. And we're not going to call someone ageist um, who is 7 years old because we're not allowing them to be a legal guardian of someone. It's like you can't be a guardian. You're 7 years old. Like like there's certain things that we have in law which are not discriminatory in some sort of like oppressive way. They actually make sense.
Sure.
There's so many examples of like y- for example, if you're black, you should probably take more vitamin D to protect yourself against this COVID-19 pandemic because uh, your melanin in your skin blocks the sun uh, rays a bit more than white people, especially more than ginger people. So ginger people should maybe take less vitamin D than black people.
And wear
And
more sunscreen.
yeah, yeah. So it's like the sun isn't being oppressively discriminating, it's like, do you know what I mean? It's just like, oh,
Hmm.
well, we just need to consider people based upon the context and what makes sense. But the fact that someone's black or the fact that someone's ginger, we don't discriminate against gingers outside of South Park because it doesn't make any sense. Unless there's a specific context where we say, okay, you need sunscreen, or like, as you say, something like this. So when it comes down to chickens or pigs or animals, um, okay, we won't talk about the right to vote or something, but the right to be not owned as property and not and therefore to not be killed and stuff like this. And there's no reason why species should be a discriminating factor in the same way that for the same reason why slavery was so abhorrent, and the same reason why discriminating on based on sex or based on age or based on any arbitrary distinction that we might want to draw between each other.
Right. So,
It,
well, I'll make the case for why I think it's not an arbitrary distinction, and that starts with like the fundamental idea of just honoring a relationship. Now, if I was to talk about your relationship with your parents, um, you would probably agree that you have duties that go above and beyond to your parents, that go beyond to a stranger, right? And you wouldn't be able to point to the cognition levels, to like the functional abilities of your parents, or any of those sorts of things. You would end up pointing to your relationship with your parents, that established those duties. And likewise, if you have a pet, the reason you make sure your pet's comfortable and happy, and all those other things, well fed, has water, but you don't do that for random animals in nature. You kind of let them to their own devices. Is that you've established this relationship, and so I think goes the case, when it comes to our dispositions on humans, that we have an established relationship with our society, and that society ends up we develop these sort of duty-based ethics where we feel obligated to look after humans in a way that we don't feel obligated to look after random animals that we haven't established such a relationship with. Um, and in our culture, we have established that relationship with things like dogs and cats, and we just haven't with pigs and cows because, well, I guess that's just the way nature has gone. Dogs were a very good type of pet, and then we ended up establishing a relationship with them. Um, so when it comes to the human case, why all else equal we would never farm them, I think comes down to these sorts of relationships. And and when we talk about a moral baseline, like from the perspective of the animal, my key argument has been, if an animal isn't self-aware and it doesn't really understand its own futures and pasts, or conceptualizes its life in these sort of existential ways, that its loss of future isn't the same thing as the loss of the future of something that can conceptualize where its future was going to begin with. And so there's like this baseline of permissibility of killing it, but then you come along and you add these extra duties that analogically make sense when we talk about parents and we talk about pets and other sorts of business relationships or whatever else. They seem to establish a fundamentally good reason not to farm humans in addition.
yeah. So we've got two main points there, which you've highlighted for me in our disagreement. So the self-awareness debate and the cognitive debate is not something that I'd want to discuss today because it's so deep, and I think we've discussed this back and forth with me, you, Magnus, and a few people in Discord. We've been talking about that for over a year and sending studies, and
Sure.
in our other Discord group, we've sent cognition studies and behavioral studies and discuss whether behavioral studies are relevant or they can be looked upon, or whether we need more uh, neuro based studies. And also we've talked about that so long, and I think it's such a deep thing, and we haven't really come to any consensus amongst our sort of like group of people who have been talking about this. And so that sort of for me, that would be a dead end to start talking about that. I think it's okay if we just agree to disagree on that one. I think that animals, non-human animals, um, do have self-awareness and do have a sense of future, and we have demonstrated that animals can understand the future and memorize things from the past, and make connections in terms of chronology. Um, but we're just going to have to disagree on that because it's a dead end conversation. The main thing that I want to, or would you agree with that summarization?
Yeah, I think I agree that that you've summarized our disagreement in the area, and I think it's also fair.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's a dead end. It's just too thick of a concept to try and cram into a few minutes. I merely wanted to offer, a plausible case, um, as to where my ethics come from on this
yeah,
distinction, not to necessarily deep dive into every single point.
sure. Well, the second thing that came up, um, that I flagged from what you said, was when you were talking about the obligation through formed through our relationships. We have these obligations, and the the way I see, well, the way I approach ethics now, and the way I see rights in general, um, is that I don't acknowledge positive rights. Pretty much, I don't think I should have an obligation to do anything. The only thing that I am willing to, it's a bit of a weird choice of words, but let's just say willing to have the obligation or accept the obligation to have, is
Mm-hmm.
to pay tax. Um, so society functions in a way that I would find more desirable than in countries where there is no tax. Living in a country where there's tax, I don't mind living, having the obligation to pay tax because it's a nicer place to live. It benefits me. It benefits society, and I don't really mind about that. That's where I differ from some of my ANCAP friends. But in terms of other obligations, I don't think there's ethically. I'm not compelled to do anything. I only see the world of ethics with negative rights. So the right not, you have the right not to be exploited in this way. You have the right not to, it just comes down to acts of violence against you, and essentially being viewed as property. Everything sort of stems from physical aggression, violence, and the right not to be owned as property. They're the two sort of like core things within sort of like a capitalist and rights based worldview. And when you were talking about the obligations stuff, I don't feel like I have any obligation morally, um, to do anything. I don't have any obligations to my parents that I don't have to strangers. I have all the same obligations. I do everything that I would do differently with my parents than I do would, would do with a stranger, is because I want to act in this way. But I don't feel like I have an obligation to do anything at all, pretty much, apart from the things that I want to willingly engage in. I don't even have an obligation to pay tax. Actually, I've got um, I could just like go into the forest and not participate in the financial system. But I really feel like there's like when we're speaking financially, when we're speaking in terms of ethics, when we're speaking about anything generally, I really don't like the concept of positive rights or obligations, and I really, the way that I think excludes that way of thinking. And so really at the core, what you were talking about with the relationship stuff and the way that you see our ethical obligations because of the relationships, I don't think applies to my worldview, really. Do you
Mm-hmm.
understand where I'm going with this, Shadow?
I can understand where you're going, though. I'd want to challenge those intuitions and see
Okay.
if you hold them.
Yeah.
I've been running this new hypothetical um, to challenge anti-speciesism. So you just give me your answer to it, and you see how you feel about it. So
Sure.
so imagine you're in the woods and you got a gun. You're a great shot, and you know if you shoot to kill, you will kill. And
Yeah.
you see a wolf chasing a deer going through the woods. Now, do you feel any obligation to shoot either one of them?
I don't. No, I don't feel an obligation, but I might like it if I, for some reason, I don't think I would shoot anyway. But if I was, for some reason, I felt for some reason there was some sort of like outrage that the deer was going to get eaten, and I had the ability to shoot, and I wanted to, then I would shoot it out, like if I wanted to, but I wouldn't. Like my actual position is I wouldn't shoot it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And that's the answer generally I expect to the first question. Then
Yeah.
the next question is if you have a wolf chasing down a person
Mm.
who's running away from the wolf, do you feel any obligation to shoot the wolf?
Um, I feel I don't feel like I have an obligation to shoot the wolf again. I feel like I in this case would probably be more inclined to shoot the wolf um, if I knew that the human would get killed. And
So
if
really,
that's
that's just your preference. Like, did you feel you
yeah,
could really just shrug your shoulders and be like, "Oh well, whatever happens, happens."
well, no, I wouldn't shrug my shoulders because what you're asking me are two. uh, Maybe you're not asking me two different questions, but there are two different questions on the table tacitly in as a result of the question. There's the question of, do you feel that I'm ethically compelled? Do I have a positive right to shoot the wolf? And a second question is, um,
Sure, there's a difference
would
between
I,
how you feel about it
yeah, would
and
I personally feel like I
but
wanted to
if you
shoot the wolf?
don't shoot and you just let the man die to the wolf, you'd feel no moral guilt or anything for that set of circumstances.
I separate I separate these things out, like I just said, with the two different questions. So I'd say the answer to the question, would I shoot the wolf? I probably would feel inclined to shoot the wolf if it was chasing a human and the human would die. Um, do I feel there's a moral obligation? No, I don't feel like there's a moral obligation to um, shoot the wolf. But I would feel like a bit of a dick if I didn't shoot the wolf in that context. And
Do
the
you feel like
reason,
a moral dick? Do you feel like you did something wrong? That's more what I'm asking.
no, I wouldn't think that I had violated any rights by not shooting the wolf. So the way that I view morality is rights violations pretty much nowadays. So was a right violated? Was a right not violated? And if I shoot the wolf, I'm violating a wolf's right. However, um, the the thing is, even like Tom Reagan, who is like pretty much a deontologist, um, is that you can still employ principles. Like in this case, you'd have something like if there's two rights which are going to be violated, the wolf is violating the right of the man, and I am violating the rights of the wolf by shooting it for chasing the man.
Hmm.
The um the least either the least suffering or the least amount of beings should be you, you should execute your decision so the least amount of beings are harmed or the least amount um, of harm is caused. So, for example, Reagan would say something like, if there was a normal dog and a comatose human, and one of them had to be shot, he would shoot the human, and I would shoot the human as well. Uh, in this example, if I wasn't going to get arrested for it, because the human's irreversibly comatose and doesn't have the opportunity to experience that much life, whereas the dog has far more opportunity to experience life, and is as psychologically far more complex and can just experience more of life. Whereas in the example with the wolf and the man let's say the man is like in his 30s or something, and he's got a family, and it's gonna cause immense suffering to the family, and he's gonna miss out on all the experience that he's got left in his life. And the wolf doesn't have that same capacity to experience life. Then um, me violating the right of the wolf is actually preferable for instead of the wolf violating the rights of the man and killing him and eating him. So in that situation, if one right is going to be
No offense,
violated,
but you're coming off like a utilitarian.
yeah, and I've seen a few people in the comment section actually. One guy commented, Tom Reagan, saying to the degree of Tom Reagan's a deontologist until it comes to the tough decisions, and then he magically flip flops into utilitarianism. But I don't really agree. I feel like it's a tiebreaker more than anything, because in this because deontology is about, we're talking about rights violations here, and if you've got to choose between a rights violation and a rights violation, well, what one do you choose? Well, then you have to have a tiebreaker, because otherwise it's symmetrical,
Uh,
and then you have to flip a coin. But that's not the way the world works. In the real world, we'd say, okay, well, using common sense, um, how are we going to break this tie? And so we would do it in the way that I would explained, had explained. But there would be some vegans out there who would see it differently and wouldn't shoot the wolf. There'd be some vegans out there who would say, well, what's this idiot doing in the forest? I don't know. Let him get eaten. I don't know. I wouldn't personally do that, but some
but
other
you
people
wouldn't feel obligated even if you considered these utilitarian, you know, consequences. You still wouldn't feel obligated to shoot the wolf.
Well, the thing is that the difference between the utilitarian perspective and the deontologist perspective there would be, if I shoot the wolf, I'm doing something immoral because I'm violating the wolf's rights. However, either way, either the man's rights are going to be violated or the wolf's rights are going to be violated. So I'm going to do the principle of the mini ride principle, Tom Reagan puts it, of overriding the minimum sort of the minimum override of the rights. And
Can I also ask, because your rights violation here, your description is that the wolf is violating the rights of the human,
yeah,
but most people would consider a wolf a non-moral agent.
yeah.
So I guess that's a little confusing of how his rights are being violated by a non-moral agent.
Well, whether someone knows it or not, you can still have a rights violation whether someone knows it or not, because it's perceived by the, well, the right that's being violated is the right of the human, right? So in this case, but if I was to like torture a pig, I'd be violating the rights of the pig. So whether or not the pig knows about the concept of rights in this case, it is neither here nor there. And whether the wolf like violates my rights, whether he knows about that is neither here or there. Rights are being
So
violated.
then the
So
wolf eating the deer is also a rights violation.
yeah, it's a rights violation of the deer. Yeah, sure, but whether they know about it or not is neither here nor there.
Right. Okay. I'm just trying to
Uh,
understand.
yeah, sure. It's maybe a tiny bit confusing at first, but that's the way that I see things. But what I would say, the difference between deontology, I just explained that it would be immoral for me to shoot the deer, but there's two immoral situations. There's like a trolley problem, and but the utilitarian perspective is morally correct to shoot. Sorry, to shoot the wolf. It's morally correct to shoot the wolf because the least suffering comes out of that, or something like that. So it's actually morally correct to kill. But the deontologist says no, it's morally wrong to kill. But I'm going to do it anyway. Right? Do you see the difference there?
I mean, I think that gets towards the threshold deontology stance.
I wouldn't even say threshold deontology. I think threshold deontology has been like chucked about a lot in like on Discord and stuff. Like Dr. Arvi has perpetuated the whole threshold deontology thing, but I don't understand why it's necessary, because you with deontology, when it gets to the point where you've got a trolley problem, you're just going to do a tiebreaker anyway. So threshold deontology means that you flip from being a deontologist, you flip to being a utilitarian. So
Sure.
then it's morally correct at some
Well,
point
I
to
guess I
murder
just
your
see
child.
how they're similar, right? Whether or not you want to call it a flip or you want to say that it's an extra consideration tiebreaker,
Yeah,
I mean you could get into the minutia of that and try and figure out which is the better explanation. But
yeah.
I suppose it somewhat lines up to some of the same consequences of what you would consider the right thing to do is. Um, well, my question here is, even if you end up saying that the right thing to do is to shoot the wolf because the man has a family and you can consider his life differently and there's more to it to his situation, then what I feel becomes the consequence of your position is when I say, well, now the wolf's chasing a marginal human, you say, well, now again, I have the same obligations as I did towards the wolf and the deer, right? So sort of what you end up saying is, look, if this human is not complex enough, then tough for you. And and that might be something you can stand by because you think those complexities are the relevant complexities. But from my own intuitions, it's just not a position I can uphold. Like just to say somebody's a marginal case and therefore is excluded from my duties is not something I seem to be able to stand by.
Sure, but the subtlety between my position and your position there would be that I have no duty to shoot the wolf in the first place, right? So you would think that you had a duty. One of them you had a duty, but the other one you didn't have a duty. You'd have a duty to the marginal case of human, and you'd have a duty to the human, but you wouldn't have a duty to the deer. But I would say I don't have a duty to any of them, but I would just act uh, in what's the word against in opposition to what I know to be a moral act
Well,
because
which ones would cause you to act between those three?
yeah, so I would say out of all three I don't have an obligation in either in any
Uh
of the
huh.
cases, but I would shoot the wolf that was chasing the 30-year-old man, but I probably wouldn't shoot the wolf that was chasing the marginal case human. um but it's a bit of a weird hypothetical because how am I privy to the knowledge of the marginal case human in the woods? Like, is a bizarre hypothetical, but I'm answering
Yeah.
like
I mean, I can
it,
construct circumstances so that you get the knowledge, but I don't think it's really too important to the question.
sure, yeah, there it's very an artificial hypothetical, but yeah, that's the answer. I wouldn't shoot the wolf for the marginal case human, but I would shoot the wolf for the non-marginal case because if there was like some, and by marginal case, what we mean here is that the marginal case human is less mentally sophisticated than the wolf, right? So we're not talking about like someone who's just like got like some mild Down syndrome
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like. We're
No,
talking
I'm
about
not
like
gonna pull the rug under your feet on that. It's
yeah,
you know what
yeah,
I mean by marginal case. It's equivalent to the deer.
yeah, sure, yeah. So if it's equivalent to the deer, yeah, I probably wouldn't shoot. I wouldn't shoot the wolf in that case. Um, yeah, because I think not acting is uh, I'm not obligated to act, and if I'm unsure, then not acting is better than acting and doing something immoral, right? So with the trolley problem, like the classic trolley problem is if you pull the lever, you're a murderer. So I don't pull the lever, right? So um,
Well, I'm a lever
you,
puller for sure. I'll even push
yeah,
the fat man.
yeah, sure. But the thing is, I guess you presented me a bit of a trolley problem with the with the wolf, but it's just I guess I don't know, man. It's a very difficult one, but I think I I think in real life, if I was there, I don't know what I'd do in real life with the trolley problem. It's the trolley problem is such a
Well, sure,
difficult one.
of course.
Because when you substitute the trolley problem with the organ transplantation, it gets really hairy, and then no one ever wants the organ transplantation one. But there's so much division on that it is almost universal that people pull the lever, right? But hardly anyone endorses the organ transplantation one. So there is some weird mental skew happening, and I haven't really located exactly where the lines are blurred on that, where the lines are on that
Uh-huh.
one. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting hypothetical that you brought up, Shadow.
Well, thanks.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I just wanted to say for my intuitions on there, it's just I feel obligated to shoot the wolf in either of the human cases.
yeah,
That's just, but when it's chasing the deer, it's just it just seems wrong to shoot either one of them to me. It's just like let nature play out. Like why should I make the wolf the victim, or why should I make the deer the whoever survives survives in that situation?
yeah.
But I guess that's just where my intuitions come from, and you know, if you stand by your answers, then 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 what you
Sure.
presented is true.
Sure, I think the difference between the trolley problem, I think the wolf problem is different from the trolley problem because the wolf is chasing the human and intentionally trying to kill the human, right? But with the trolley problem, it's like the helplessness of the runaway train and the two people, or the two lines with I don't know, the three people or the two people on one and the one person on the other. Um, it's like when you pull the lever, you're choosing who dies with this helplessness. They're all innocent. But in the case of the wolf isn't innocent. The wolf is the one, um, who is, sort of causing, um, or victimizing, right? So it's like shooting the train. It's like blowing up the train almost. Like the trolley that's heading toward down the track. If you like could dynamite the train, we wouldn't feel bad for the train, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if there was like it, like your hypothetical, if it was more of a trolley problem, it would be like the wolf is heading towards a baby or a 90-year-old man, and it's going to kill one of them. What one gets eaten, sort of thing, and then it would be more of a trolley problem. So it's slightly different from the trolley problem, actually. Thinking about it a bit more, but it is an interesting hypothetical, and yeah, I think the main difference, going back to quickly to finish off what I wanted to say about the threshold deontology, and then maybe we should wrap it up. The the difference, my understanding of threshold deontology is that you get your deontologist, and at a certain point, you assess things through a a utilitarian lens. So at a certain point, it's not just like, oh, you're gonna do something moral, but I don't care because it's I feel like this is the best thing to do. Like I don't care if I murder someone, because I'm gonna save a million people or something. I'm gonna save the whole planet, so I'm gonna murder this one person to save the whole planet. So a deontologist will say, well, I knew it was wrong to kill this one person, but I did it anyway. But a utilitarian is going to come along and say, no, it's not wrong. It was the right thing to do. And so with a threshold deontologist, it's like you're a deontologist up to a certain extent, and then they say, no, it's the right thing to do to kill that child, or it was the right thing to do to blow up that that
Sure.
that man or something. And but deontologists wouldn't say it. Deontologists would say, no, it was morally wrong to do that, but I did it anyway. Like sod it. Like, do you see the difference there? It's like, um, and I really think that that is an important distinction because there is a difference between ethical obligation and what I choose to do, because not everyone chooses to act in line with their own ethics. Like you know, like Acracia, Sam Harris, and like you've got like various, or yeah, Sam Harris summed it up with Acracia. Like you could know that something is the correct thing to do, but you act differently, or you think that there's a certain rule which is the correct thing to do, but you say sod the rule and I'm going to act differently, and yeah, that is just contrasted with a utilitarian perspective where you think, oh no, this is actually the right thing to do, and I always act according to the right thing to do, or something like this. So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Well, yeah, well, I mean, for me, obligations aren't this objective thing. For me, when I call something an obligation, it's because I just feel obliged to do it, right? Like I know it's going to leave me with a ton of moral guilt if I don't. And
yeah.
that's the sort of description I'm giving that. Um, so
But moral guilt, like you can have some sort of like moral guilt over something that you have no moral obligation to do. Like so you could just off the top of my head have a hypothetical situation of
Well, just like
uh,
ignore a homeless person or something.
yeah, you could ignore a homeless person, or even more a more extreme example of what I was going to say would be, for example, had you known about something, had you known about the bomb in the building, you could have gone there and defused the bomb and saved all the people who died in the tragic explosion. But you didn't know about the bomb, but you feel some sort of weird guilt and, oh, I wish I could have known about the bomb. If I wasn't so stupid, I would have known that from this, and I would have connected the dots and done this detective work, and I would have gone there and defused the bomb. But you weren't in the position to do it, but you feel some sort of weird guilt, despite the fact that you couldn't have done it anyway.
Well, maybe we
And
should say, like make it a little more complex and say that it's moral guilt without justification. Like I can't give an additional reason as to why it was reasonable not to do it anyways.
mm, yeah, so I think so. I
Right? Because
really
I
feel
might
like
I might feel bad for killing in self-defense, but I can
yeah,
give, a sort of justification for it that at least turns it around and makes me feel fine with doing it.
yeah,
But maybe
yeah.
I
So
can't I can't really do that with the wolf and the human case, right?
yeah,
There doesn't seem to be an abundance of reasons that I could present to myself that would turn it around.
yeah, definitely. I think that is an interesting one. I think we've covered a lot of decent ground in today's conversation. What do you think, Shadow? Have you got anything else you want to address, or should we leave it here for today?
I think it's a great time to wrap it up. I think it was a good conversation.
Yeah, man, I enjoyed that one, and yeah, it's nice having you on the channel. And for everyone subscribed to me, check out some of Shadow's videos. He definitely has an interesting collection of videos where he explores really cool themes, challenging some of the arguments in veganism. And he's not a vegan, so obviously some of my subs might get their feathers ruffled at some of his content. But it's nice to check out the content and really sort of really understand some of the counter arguments to veganism, so you can then be equipped to discuss more, or even just upgrade the quality of the conversation in the vegan debate sphere. So yeah, definitely an interesting channel. I'll leave a link in the description down below. So yeah, man, have you got anything you want to say to anyone before we
No,
we
I'll say
close
the
off?
same to my viewers. Go check out Vegan Foot Soldier's content. He's not only an interesting and outrageous guy, but he's also an excellent musician. If you listen to some of his music, can't recommend it enough. And he's a great part of the conversation.
Thanks, man. Excellent. All right, then. So let's leave it there. So I hope you have all enjoyed it, and I'll see you again in the next video.
Bye.